Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Mariano Grossi, emerged from his talks in Tehran over the past weekend, proclaiming a success in getting a stopgap measure in the standoff regarding the fate of the 2015 nuclear deal between Iran, all members of the UN Security Council, plus Germany and the European Union. Grossi and his Iranian interlocutors agreed to a so-called temporary technical understanding under which limited monitoring activities of nuclear facilities will go on for the next 3 months, while political negotiations intensify between Washington, Tehran, and the European Union's headquarters in Brussels. The tension emanating from a new Iranian law dictating non-cooperation with nuclear inspectors has eased, with the focus shifting to the Biden administration emerging negotiation posture. To break it all down, we are joined from New York City in the United States by Dr. Olli Heinonen, who is the former Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency and a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center at Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Also joining us from Tel Aviv here in central Israel is Mr. Amir Javed Anfar, who is an Iran lecturer at IDC Herzliya. Thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Then with us here in the studio is our TV7 analyst and host of TV7's Watchmen Talk, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, give us a broader understanding now that the additional protocol for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action has been thrown out. Of course, a technical document was agreed upon between Iran and the IAEA, which the Secretary General Mariano Grossi, or Rafael Mariano Grossi, has stated very carefully that it is far less than what the protocol initially intended. Where are we standing here when we're talking about inspections of Iranian aspirations or the nuclear program and potential aspirations to develop a nuclear weapon?
Well, to paraphrase the old song, A Bridge Over Troubled Waters, this is a bridge over heavy water, a 3-month bridge during which all the parties to this conflict should negotiate either a return to the old 2015 nuclear deal or some sort of a new deal or a mixture of both. Now, far be it for me to compete with Dr. Heinonen on technical explanations of what is going on here. But one should remember that the additional protocol is intended for those less than honest countries who do not voluntarily reveal what they have. For them, for the honest countries, you have the original non-proliferation treaty. But when it turned out in the 1990s that Iraq and North Korea have concealed some of their facilities and activities, the additional protocol came into being, and there you have inspections which the IAEA announces, and the country, the host country, must agree to and must let inspectors in. The compromise or the technical understanding reached between Grossi and Salehi of the Iranian Atomic Agency is that the verification mechanism will be kept in place, but the footage of the films during this monitoring will be kept by the Iranians and will not be given over to the inspectors, so that if there is an agreement reached by April or May, fine, they will be able to screen this old footage by then and see if there was any violation. But during this time, the Iranians are supposedly keeping their sovereignty. They are following the law of the Majlis, and everybody happy.
Majlis, of course, in reference to the Iranian parliament. But Dr. Heinonen, did we miss anything in this introduction? And to what degree, considering snap inspections, as is mentioned, of course, in the additional protocol, Director General Grossi mentioned that the snap inspections remain in place, but those SNAP inspections are not really SNAP, considering the fact that there is a process in which you need to undergo in order to bring about those inspections in the first place. So, what is actually the level of transparency when we're talking about Iran's nuclear operations?
Thank you. I think it was a very good introduction to this matter where we stand today with regard of the IAEA inspection activities. I want to draw your attention to words from Rafael Grossi when he said these are necessary measures. There is no such word as necessary in safeguards parlance. Either you meet your inspection goals or you don't. And there are very, very unusual arrangements now in place. First of all, SNAP inspections. I don't think that with the short term, this is a tremendous problem that the IAEA will not make those what are called complementary access. They are not really SNAP inspections. They are complementary access to certain locations. It will, with a long term, reduce the knowledge of the program. But the crux of the matter is to which extent IAEA can do its routine inspection activities. And one example, we already heard about this surveillance equipment and access to the surveillance and camera records. This is not the usual practice. So IAEA has to wait now 3 months to see what will be on those films or computer hard disks. What if the equipment failed in between? It will not be observed during this because IAEA instrumentation is very well secured. Iranians will not have access to inside the surveillance system without breaking the IAEA seal. And this is only way to see whether the system is working properly. So first of all, there is a risk to that end. Then the other thing is that we are looking at enrichment plants, which have certain verification timeliness goals. Normally one does a full inspection with all ways and means once a month. And the surveillance records are part of it. So what this means that IAEA is not able to make timely conclusion on success of its activities. So these are the downsides. And then certainly are then these negotiations which start. I think it comes, in my view, a little bit in bad time, because this falls exactly in the middle of the Iranian presidential race. This will probably be one of the biggest topics on those negotiations and talks in Israel, and the candidates put their proposals forward. So I think it's very difficult for Iranian government at this point of time agree to return back to the implementation of JCPOA with some extra measures. And they will use this timeline to torture the US part and the other negotiators, say, look, do you want it or not? And in a way, they have here quite a lot of instruments in their hand.
Indeed.
And it will be very difficult for the US to lift the sanctions at this point of time. So I see quite turbulent times being ahead. And the IAEA unfortunately cannot meet its inspection goals. But I'm sure that Mr. Grossi has approval of some of the key member states of the IAEA that this is the way to go and let the IAEA to fly with the reduced inspection regime.
Indeed. Well, we'll get back to you, Dr. Heinonen, very soon, as I would like to ask you also about a statement that I'd like initially to ask Mr. Javed. The Islamic Republic Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei came out and stated in front of a number of senior mullahs who attended one of his public addresses, or not so public, but private addresses, in which he mentioned that if deemed necessary, the Iranians will move in order to ratchet up uranium enrichment to 60% purity, and of course has also mentioned the blatant actions of the Americans and the E3, Germany, France, and Great Britain, for, of course, coming out in a joint statement and having the audacity of course, voicing concerns about Iranian nuclear activities. To what degree do you see this statement as part of a broader strategy of Iran to try and apply additional pressures on the West in order to capitulate prior to the Iranian will to return into the 2015 nuclear agreement, considering also the economic situation right now, domestically speaking, where it seems like the Iranian economy is devastated and it's just continuing to deteriorate as we speak?
Yes, this is part of an Iranian strategy to pressure the United States to remove the sanctions. Iran sees this as an important leverage, and it wants to drive home the point that it's America that should compensate Iran. It's America that should take the first steps. And if Iran feels that America is still not interested, then Iran has other options available at its disposal. We have to understand that this is the situation. Ayatollah Khamenei is in a bind right now, in a way. On the one hand, he feels that he has an important leverage at his hands, which is one of them is increasing enrichment to higher levels. But on the other hand, until now, I think he seems to be very concerned that Biden is not making any serious moves. Of course, recently Biden took some initial moves. There were some restrictions regarding Iranian diplomats in the UN. That was removed. How far they could move around. That was imposed by the Trump administration. There's now even apparently a deal reached over Iran's frozen assets in South Korea. But these are not in any way, shape, or form enough for Iran. Iran needs Biden to remove the sanctions now. Iran can't go to the Russians. The Russians don't seem to be too bothered. The Chinese even less. So this is something that Ayatollah Khamenei has to revert to. And I think another reason why Ayatollah Khamenei is concerned is because, I'm sure people translate the foreign press for him. If he reads what Biden's been saying since he came to office, it's far more China, COVID, China than Iran, China, and COVID. So I think that's another way in order to push up the Iran issue in the priority list of President Biden, because Iran, it's becoming more and more difficult for Iran to bear the costs of the sanctions.
Dr. Heinonen, in layman's terms, to what degree is 60% concern, considering the fact that it's, of course, a lot closer to the 90% that is necessary in order to produce a nuclear weapon, or at least enough material for a nuclear weapon? What can you tell us about that? And should we be alarmed?
I think we should, because actually this is more a symbolic presentation. And to this end, I would like you to remind about this uranium enrichment scheme applied by Dr. Khan in Pakistan, where he produces high-enriched uranium stepwise. First, you go from natural uranium to 20%, then you take it out, you feed it again, you collect 60% enriched uranium, you take it out, and you feed it again, and you have 90% enriched uranium. So now what a leader tells here that, look, I'm on my road to this, and I plan perhaps to use 60% enriched uranium. Then if you go to today's peaceful applications, it's a very rare application. Actually, the only one which comes to my mind at this point of time are the Russian icebreakers. They have fuel enrichment around 50%, 60%. There is no one research reactor which today, modern research reactor, which runs with that kind of fuel. So I think that we need to look into that extent. It's a threat. Is it much closer to nuclear weapon? Yes, sure. But it's not anymore a huge difference, because once you have achieved 20% enriched uranium, which they now do, you have done 90% of the effort which is needed to produce weapons grade material. If you go to 60%, you add perhaps 5% to that. Then instead of being on 90% level, you will be 95 level. Then the crux of the matter is then you pile up this 60%. And then when you turn it to weapon grade material, that installation is not a big. You need only a few hundred centrifuges, and that's all. So it's easy to conceal.
Which,
So,
if we translate
I
that
think
into
in a
time,
big picture, yes, it's a bad sign. It so tries to threaten, and we need to understand what is the real purpose of Iran's nuclear program.
translating this, however, into a time frame, does this narrow the breakout point to enough material in order to produce a nuclear weapon, or enough material for a nuclear weapon, to mere weeks or days, or still a month ahead and as such?
Months ahead at this point of time. But if they pile up this 60%, let's say they start to do it now, so by the end of the year they have a decent stock of that, then it's a matter of days once you have that stock over there.
Indeed. Mr. Olin, to what degree is Israel alarmed by this fact? And of course, we hear about the acquisition of the KC-47 or 49, if I'm not mistaken, which is the carriers that are the aircraft that are able to refuel the F-35 stealth fighter jets in order to target distant locations for potential long-distant operations?
Well, these air refuelers are not yet being supplied. And if you do send such a tanker to meet a stealth fighter, it is no longer stealth, because the meeting between the two can be seen on radar. Perhaps coming back from a sortie after there is no need for secrecy, it will happen. No, Israel is not yet concerned because, as the director of military intelligence said a few weeks ago, once there is a decision, which is yet to be made by the Iranian leadership, it should take up to 2 years in order for the various efforts or lines of effort to converge. You must have a warhead, you must have people who are designing it, and obviously for the Iranians, it would be foolish to be advanced in only one of these efforts, the uranium, the fissile material, because it will give Israel or others a reason to strike at them before they have anything ready to strike Israel with. However, it does seem as if, and Dr. Heinen mentioned the Russian icebreakers. This seems to be an icebreaker because, yes, it is only for 3 months. Perhaps it has to do with the domestic Iranian calendar to the political calendar. But once you have it in place, you can extend it for another couple of months if there are negotiations. And it seems reasonable to watch and see whether Rob Malley, the American emissary for these talks, and others, and eventually Secretary Blinken, will meet with their counterparts during these 3 months. If we are now projecting ourselves 3 months from now and nothing has happened, the confrontation will be much more severe. But one should guess that there will be some progress during this time, which will give both sides the rationale to extend this 3 months hiatus.
I'd like to focus on what you just said with regard to the decision has not yet been made. Mr. Javed Anfal, when we're talking about this decision, of course, in the early 90s, we had Ayatollah Ali Khamenei come out and state a fatwa in which nuclear weapon production would be illegal under his religious authority. Then just recently we heard intelligence minister of the Islamic Republic come out and say, well, this may be changed if Iran is pushed into the corner, of course, bringing the whole analogy of the cat parable or whatever being put into the picture. And then we have now the supreme leader of the Ayatollah regime come out and state this statement about the 60%. Of course, as is mentioned here, this is a threat. Is this something that the Iranians, domestically speaking, are willing to bear the brunt for? Or are we seeing now things on the streets in Iran where the pressure, of course, considering the fact that in the international media, this might be on the front page or the second page or third page, but it's still not the center stage considering the COVID and other challenges worldwide that have center stage at this time?
To be honest with you, if I would not put too much meaning and too much stock in the whole fatwa issue. There are some even who wonder if Ayatollah Khamenei can really issue a fatwa. Is he a real Ayatollah? Does he have a real PhD thesis, Risale Amaliyeh? Is it really his? So, I think that's more for domestic theatrics and those who want to perhaps portray a different image of Iran. I think, to bring the whole issue of Islam into this and that Ayatollah Khamenei would not lie. We know how Ayatollah Khamenei has run the Islamic Republic. He's run it much like any other politician, and much worse, in fact. And he's done things that have been un-Islamic until now. So breaking a fatwa is not going to set a bad precedent, because other things, the precedent of doing un-Islamic things has already happened. I think it's much more important to see where Iran is going with its actions. For now, look, the Iranian intelligence apparatus is being shocked basically by the killing of Fakhrizadeh. There's a dispute going on between the military intelligence, in this case seems to be IRGC intelligence, and the Ministry of Intelligence. In that interview that you refer to, the Minister of Intelligence said the people in charge of the security of Fakhrizadeh and the person who was in charge of, more important, the person who they say they caught, was a former member of the military. He didn't say which one, IRGC or the army, but he said, we don't have any remit to go on do intelligence work within the armed forces. It's the armed forces intelligence. And then, of course, there was another counter attack, by the IRGC intelligence. They come and said, no, this person was already out of the armed forces. So I think this is something that is, for example, something that the Supreme Leader will test and will look at, as well as the economy, as well as national cohesion, as well as Iran's foreign policy vulnerabilities, if and when he decides to make a bomb, which I'm not sure he will, and not the fatwa. I think the fatwa will be far, far more below in terms of the priority, it will be far less important.
Talking about, of course, the fatwa as a religious ruling in the Islamic religion. Dr. Heinonen, I'd like to ask you, as somebody who has been dealing with the Iranian file under various capacities in your past, as part also as the Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, you held the Iran file during 2003 when the Iranians, under the chief Iranian nuclear scientist, according to various reports, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, was actually advancing. Of course, after he was assassinated, the IRGC came out and labeled him as a major general, which asks yourself whether he is indeed a civilian or in a military capacity. But when we're talking here specifically, I don't know if you met him personally, but do you think that his assassination has put the Iranian nuclear program or project in a certain backlash or in trouble in a certain capacity?
Certainly, it has an impact to the morale of some of the people who might be in the leading position in that program. There is no doubt about it. But this is an important national program, so all the eggs are not in the same basket. And if we look this cache which Israel lifted from Tehran, the nuclear archives, so we see that there are a group of experts which work together. There are leaders or the leading scientists, but there is always a deputy. So I think that in the case of this assassination of Fakhrizadeh, yes, it's a blow, but it's not a fatal blow. They have measures for a place, and I'm sure if they continue the program, there is already a man in a helm who is taking it forward. So it's more kind of a public relation type of thing, rather than really a technical matter which brings the program to halt. Delay might be.
Indeed. Mr. Oren, I'd like also to hear about the regional implications of this whole ordeal. We do not have, of course, very much time, but also from an Israeli perspective, where are we standing right now?
We are standing almost 4 weeks before the Israeli elections. There will be a new government, perhaps a new policy vis-a-vis the Biden administration. Right now, we are in transition. So we will have to see come March or late March or early April whether Israel can synchronize its policy with the American one, the new American one, and then perhaps have some input into the American negotiations with Iran.
And meetings are currently already being taken place here in Jerusalem with regard to trying to decide what course of action to take. Of course, one of the options is to identify another 2 women and 4 men who could be sent into the alleyways of Tehran to get maybe another archive. But who knows? This is all the time that we have for today. So I'd like to thank Mr. Javed Anfar and Dr. Heinonen for being part of today's panel. Yeah. And I'd like to thank also our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, as well as our viewers. And we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.